Hello, and a big warm welcome. Um, this is actually the first webinar that we've done in a while here at ShapeBuy, so I am super excited indeed to be here today with you all, and with our amazing panel as well. I should just let you know, we do have Betsy Field from Zendesk here with us. She's having a couple of latency issues in terms of Wi-Fi, so we'll definitely have her audio, I really hope, and hopefully video as well if we can get that sorted out. But just to let you know, Betsy is here with our panel as well. So for those of you who don't know me and us, just a bit of background quickly. I'm Dave Call, the business director here at ShapeBuy. We're an independent creative agency specialising in helping B2B focused tech companies stand out through creative thinking and impactful design. And I suppose you might be wondering maybe why we invited you all here to talk about differentiating your brand through creative expression. And the truth is that over the past year or two, doing that effectively seems to be getting harder. The combination of reduced budgets, fewer resources, our obsession with measuring everything, the non-stop rise of short-termism, the non-stop decline in appetite for risk, the fragmented media landscape, all the things you have to compete for attention with, all these things are kind of creating a perfect storm that makes compelling brand expression a bit of a tricky thing to navigate these days. Or does it? Because there are brands out there that are doing that amazingly well, and our panel here all have tremendous track records of creating and building truly iconic brand identities. Nobody's saying it was easy, but they've managed it to great effect. So how have they done it? And what challenges have they faced along the way? And how can their stories and experiences help you guys to go forth and find authentic, compelling ways of expressing your own brands? We'll definitely be discussing that over the next 40 minutes or so. There'll be around 15 minutes after that for Q&A, so do get your questions in on the chat if you think of any during the conversation. But before we do that, though, let me just do some quick intros so you can get to know our panel a little. And even though we can't see her, I'm going to start with Betsy Field. For over 17 years, Betsy's defined brand experiences of companies big and small, all of which have helped shape her perspective on the ingredients of a successful brand. She draws from a diverse portfolio that spans health and wellness, DTC brands, retail, web communications, AI, SaaS, and now she's executive creative director at Zendesk and responsible for the brand identity, global art direction, and the brand experience over there. We've got Tom Ovens here as well. Tom is our creative director here at ShapeBuy. He describes himself as an ambassador of embracing the art of simplicity and loves nothing more than ripping things apart to delve deeper and explore meaningful ways to create authentic and impactful visual communications. Tom leads the talented ShapeBuy design team here to push boundaries, build recognition, make a difference for our clients. He's really passionate about collaborating with his team, partner, and clients to land on creative solutions that help fulfill personal, team, and business objectives. And speaking of a team, it says here that his favourite team member is our business director, Dave, who he describes as funny, talented, well-dressed, and looking extremely youthful despite his age. Wow.
That's the first time I'm hearing that, but okay, I'll take it.
You'll often hear Tom swooning over any typeface he's discovered or discussing titles. Please do Google that with care. And in his free time, he loves to disappear on his bike. And then finally, we have Nessim Higson. Hi, Nassim. Nassim has helped manage and build brand teams at both Squarespace and WeTransfer. He's currently helping Zoe chart the future of health. Great brand. Really interesting stuff there. He's also run his own independent design studio, IAAH, which is predominantly Sophie Entertainment, works for a variety of different mediums, and believes that design has a responsibility to not only contribute to the economic market, but to the social fabric of society. And Nessim's work has been recognised by Who's Who list of national and international institutions. So that's our panel. And once again, I really do want to thank you guys all for taking the time to join us today, especially Nessim, who's on holiday in Italy right now, sunning himself. Certainly didn't have to join us for a webinar on brand expression, but I'm so glad you have. And actually, I'm going to start with you, if that's okay, Nassim.
Go for it.
Because during the registration process for this event, we asked people to tell us about their biggest challenge in this area. And it was really interesting seeing all the various responses, especially there were a few themes that cropped up quite a lot. And one that really jumped out at me was differentiation. So, you know, in saturated markets in the world where everyone's jostling for attention, as I said before, finding a differentiated way to express yourself is vital, obviously, but very difficult, especially because, as you know, different for different sake doesn't work. How you differentiate has to be unique to you. Your last three companies, Squarespace, WeTransfer, and now Zoe, all have very different but equally powerful approaches to creative expression. And So in your experience, what is the key to finding the approach that works for your brand?
Good question. I'm reflecting on it. I would say, indeed, I think all three of those companies have been really different in their approach. All three have been really true to who they are. I think, as you were mentioning a second ago, and some people that might be dialing in right now are seeing a radically changing landscape that's happening right now, and I think that's probably changing the way a lot of previous companies, even those three that you mentioned, and new companies are performing and behaving. I think trying to be as true as you can be to the roots of the company, and have a sense of identity, and also understanding the audience really well and staying true to that. And I guess being even more pointed with that is trying to understand when and where the company and the brand can take bets, can make bets and take bets. That's something that I think is becoming harder and harder from marketing, specifically from a marketing standpoint, of in a world of performance marketing, wanting to understand really intimately where every dollar and cent moves things. Sometimes you just don't know. So I would say those previous three companies, I think they've taken some big swings historically, and they've netted out really well in different ways. So yeah.
And of those three, were there any that it was particularly hard to find that kind of source of truth, that essence that was unique to you or to the brand?
So I'll be honest. I think with all three, it's hard for me to take any credit. I think all three inherently had that from the get-go. I would say one consistent thread, and again, I think this is maybe a granular piece of fact and truth I can give to everyone. I truly think it all starts from the top. I think that uh, a really good CEO, really good C-suite leadership, it's really integral for people to try and understand that, and take those bets, make those bets. The founder of Squarespace is very passionate about design inherently, even though he's an engineer. The CCO that's at WeTransfer right now, and the previous leadership at that company when it started, were very intent on supporting creativity through and through. And then I think Jonathan Wolf, who runs Zoe, is the founder of Zoe, one of the founders of Zoe, and also Tim Spector. I think they truly believe in the mission of changing the lives of millions. And I think in those three examples, I've been fortunate enough to work at these companies and be a part of it and contribute to it. But I think it really, a lot of it has to do with leadership and having that buy-in from a really top tier level to be able to understand that. And much like I was saying, I think as a result of the landscape changing, those companies are also feeling it as well. So even if you have that leadership in place, they still feel it. They still get affected. So.
Yeah, for sure. And actually, I mentioned earlier that we asked attendees here to put in that form about what the biggest challenge was. More than one person said getting buy-in from leadership. So I definitely want to touch on that a little bit later on, because obviously, it's great to have leadership that believes in the value of brand. But even then, as you say, sometimes it's hard to sell in the value when macro forces or whatever it may be might be turning on the company a little bit. But also, on the flip side of that, you might have businesses where the C-suite don't necessarily believe in the value of brand. Maybe that sell has to be a lot harder. But I do want to come on to that a little bit later on.
Yep.
I just want to move on to you, Betsy, if we can hear you. Do we have you still with us?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. There might be a bit of
Wonderful.
a lag on the line, so we'll take things a little bit slow. But I wanted to come on to you with this one next because we've had your colleague, Erin Pinkley, also on the creative team at Zendesk, in our events previously, and also Pralini Udayanchichi, who's on the marketing side of things as well. And we spoke in that event about how Zendesk also has a leadership team that believes fundamentally in the value of creativity and the value of brand. So that's great news for you guys as well. But in terms of the way that you then take that out into the world and express the Zendesk brand, I mean, we are huge fans. I've said this before. We're huge fans of the way that you do that at Zendesk. You know, in the B2B world, what you're doing is quite frankly phenomenal. But a lot of that, as I understand it, is very structured around brand attributes and design principles that you and your team effectively use as benchmarks and use to judge whether your brand is being expressed as it should be. Could you just give us a little bit of color on exactly how you guys go about doing that?
Yeah, of course. And I'll try to go slow and just please interrupt if the latency is disruptive.
I can hear you fine.
Okay, great. That's good to hear. So yeah, I mean, we recently went through a brand refresh in 2023. And even previous to that, we used brand attributes pretty heavily to judge whether our work was on brand. And so I think first it's worth talking about the differences between attributes and design principles, if that's all right. I mean, attributes we think of as characteristics of the brand. They describe how you intend the audience to perceive the brand and the company. And so we, during the refresh, we, in the very beginning, knew that we had to revisit our attributes and develop ones that were in tune with who the company was or wanted to be today. And so, currently those attributes for Zendesk are confident, distilled, generous, and fresh. And we use those, yes, as benchmarks to decide in every piece of work that we do whether something is going to express the brand and the personality of the brand the way we intend. Are we going to be perceived the way we want to be perceived? And ideally, every piece of work takes into consideration all four of our attributes. But what we've discovered is that sometimes you dial them up and down. Like the first two attributes of confident and distilled are, we are those all the time. That's how we want to show up to the world all the time. But generous and fresh are things that we sprinkle in or we dial up and down depending on where we're meeting our audience. What is the touch point? How much do we want to engage the audience, right? Where are they on their learning journey? And so we use those pretty heavily in our work to express the brand and make sure that there's a level of consistency in our personality. Design principles, on the other hand, is actually something new that we're developing at Zendesk. We consider these value statements, and they're more, product design teams use these pretty heavily. We adopt them on the brand side because we feel like that is a way of establishing consistency in our experiences, our brand experiences. So they're these value statements that frame tough decisions, tough design decisions. And if the entire team understands what quality is, right? How we measure what a great brand experience is, then that also contributes to consistency across the entire brand experience. So you can think of these as, ways in which, like a checklist and tools with the attributes that we use to facilitate conversations with stakeholders and our leadership about, whether or not something is on brand and whether or not we are actually like meeting quality expectations of the experience.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely love that. And I'm sure that people listening and watching are frantically scribbling down notes here because it's a really great way to do things. But I'm not sure it's entirely universal. I certainly don't think all of our clients, and they should be, but I don't think they all have a system like this to go by. I just wanted a quick question. I definitely want to come on to consistency because that's a theme again that's cropped up a lot when people have been telling us about their challenges in this area. Especially that balance between kind of consistency versus evolution. But I just wondered, in terms of those four attributes, do you review those on a regular basis? Could you see those potentially changing in the future, or are they kind of, for want of a better word, a little bit timeless?
I think they have a sense of stickiness for the brand. You shouldn't evolve them too often. That could harm consistency, right? But they should align to who the company and the brand is today. So if at any one point in time the brand needs to evolve, currently Zendesk is going through an evolution from its look and feel and voice and tone. And so that's, the company was changing. The company is maturing. And that signaled to us that the brand needed to also evolve. And so it immediately sent us into like, okay, well, what is the brand personality today? What does it need to be to represent the company how we want it to be represented and to change the perception of the audience? Really, a brand refresh, one of the signals is, are you differentiated in the market, right? Are you distinct? And we were finding that no, that wasn't the case anymore. And to stay ahead, we really need to keep hold of our foothold of staying ahead. We needed to evolve.
Absolutely, for sure. I definitely do want to touch on this a little bit more. And actually, Tom, I want to come to you on this theme of consistency and evolution as well. But actually, just focusing on consistency for a second, because I love this phrase: repetition breeds reputation. I think it's breeds. I say I love the phrase. I might butcher it. Something along those lines. Repetition breeds reputation. And actually, your brand isn't really what you say it is. It exists in the minds of your audience. It's what they perceive it to be. And actually, but what you can do is obviously be so consistent that what you want it to be kind of builds up over time, because they're the messages that you're pushing into your audience's mind. In terms of the way that you guys work, and you and your team work with clients around consistency, it's often when you end up working, because we work with clients small and large, but especially slightly bigger ones. You work with kind of different global teams within one brand, and there's a lot of kind of disparity there. There's a lot of mixed messages. There's a lack of consistency between teams. How do you guys join those dots to help enable more consistency within their brand expression, the work that you guys do?
Yeah, it's a great question, David. It really is consistent with what Nassim and Betsy have been saying, and that really fundamentally it's about identifying what is the core of the brand that needs to kind of be protected, preserved. Where is the awareness? Where is their recognition for the brand, and where is that equity? And that might be in the values or attributes that Betsy was talking about. It may be in the tone of voice, in motion, in a conceptual approach. And I think fundamentally, certainly from an outside perspective coming in, is to make sure that we're fully understanding the breadth and depth of the brand, and where there is recognition that we need to retain to make sure that we start to build that consistency. But also fundamentally, we need to make sure that we're understanding where we can push those boundaries, because as you say, we've got different teams in different locations with different needs. So how are we able to flex that brand and enable it to evolve and grow to meet those business needs and challenging market conditions at the same time? And I think only by working with internal teams and the stakeholders, and ideally, as Nassim was saying, right from the top, a clear understanding of what the business objective is and how creativity can play a role in helping to divulge that and make a difference, you can then start to piece together the journey for the brand as such.
And I mean, I sort of know the answer to this anyway. I've worked with this for a long time. But obviously, it's slightly different in your case, because you're not as fully exposed to those inner workings as Nassim and Betsy are, living and breathing within the business on a day-to-day basis. So how do you kind of get under the skin of a brand when you're not as fully exposed to it as an in-house team?
It's a great question, and it's so critical. I think it's so important that we get to the point where we've got as close to an internal team's understanding of a brand for us to do the most effective work. And so I think there's a few stages to it. I think fundamentally what we're trying to achieve is to build rapport and trust with the in-house team. We appreciate the sensitivities of a brand, and I think we never want to be seen to be, bulldozing our way in or suggesting that anything is wrong as such. We try to eke out where there is an opportunity for us to make a difference and to bring value, and to fully understand how our capacity can cross over with an in-house capacity and deliver something different. And really, I think of a brand as being a creative expression of the people and the business behind it. And so fundamentally, we need to glean that level of understanding for us to communicate it. So Is there good alignment? You know, what's the tone and the feel? Is it playful? Is it wacky and wild? What's been done in the past? What's been tried and tested? What's failed? Is there appetite to do something new? And fundamentally, what are we there to achieve? What does success look like? And so I think only by building those relationships, not only with the in-house team, but the wider stakeholders, perhaps gleaning insights from customers or prospects, having clear definition between how we can work in parallel with the in-house team, is all really, really important. And then obviously there are a few advantages to being external. I think, you know, sometimes we come in and we ask questions that maybe clients haven't asked themselves or haven't had the opportunity to ask themselves, might be a fairer, you know, sometimes a gathering might happen in a room with an external agency that wouldn't naturally happen internally. And so that presents an opportunity not only for us, but also for some internal teams. And then I think finally, I would say, it's really important to move on from some of the more theoretical conversations and, you know, research and development and start to put things down on a page. I think it's really good to get reactions from people very quickly, and nothing like showing something in context or starting to visualize an idea or a notion of what the next step for a brand might be is the best way to get candid reactions and really to push the collaboration that little bit further.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, Nassim, I wanted to come to you sort of on a similar subject, really, because I know that you've joined Zoe fairly recently, and I am springing this question on you a little bit, so apologies for that. But when you first get into a business, how long does it take you to get up to speed with how, not just kind of, well, everything, I suppose, really. So, you know, how the brand is currently being expressed, what's going on, what's the backdrop to that, what's happened in the past, where the business is going, how that relates to how the brand needs to be expressed going forward, what needs to change. How do you kind of get under the skin of a business like Zoe when you first start there? Is it kind of a process that you do the same thing every time, or is it unique to each business when you go in there?
I think every business is different. I think there's levels of complexity that vary from company to company. I also think, and as such, I think there's different business challenges and problems. I think to kind of piggyback what Tom was saying a second ago, I think one of the beautiful things about being, you know, also still running my own studio and working on entertainment projects. So I have my hand in you know, some brand side. I'm also working client side still to a degree. You're fresh, so you're able to ask the right questions. More times than not, when you're working with a brand, it's usually pretty targeted and pretty specific on a project. So they have an idea of like, we need help with X. So you get brought in. And I always say that I think when you join a company, either contractually or full time, there's this kind of honeymoon stage that I think is really beautiful, because you are given the gift of not knowing. And what happens is anyone who works at a company over a period of time, there's a certain level of, I don't know how to explain it, but you start to lose a little bit of plasticity, a little bit, and curiosity, and you're told no a few times, and that is just the way that things are, whether someone is aware of it or not. So when you start a company, working at a company or with a company, a lot of times there's this beautiful moment where you see a lot of glaring aspects, issues, and what's really beautiful is you can kind of call them out really quickly. And depending on the organization, some people will actually act on it. A lot of times, I think they have that rigor that's kind of built in. That's just like, oh well, no, you can't do that because of X. But it's a really lovely thing, and I think to try and strive to do that is something that I think everyone should try to do. But kind of going back to your original question on like, how long does it take? I guess it really kind of varies. Depends on the organization. Zoe's very different than WeTransfer or Squarespace, where I've worked, and they move at a very quick speed. And I think kind of like, I guess the thing I would say is that with any of them, I think the key to success is just trying to recognize the gaps, to see the gaps consistently, however long your tenure is at a company, because that's where like real innovation and real, really great work can happen is trying to seize upon, okay, well, we really should try and do X. Doing X can be really hard, obviously, sometimes, but I think being able to recognize it and try and push that forward is like a big one. So
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned WeTransfer there. I've again, talking about brands that we really, really admire here, WeTransfer is definitely up there. I know that you played a significant part in that. And then when we first spoke, we talked about building a culture of creative expression during your time at WeTransfer. I just wondered if you could let us in behind the curtain on how you went about doing that, identifying some of those gaps, but also, as you say, working really hard internally to build that culture, and maybe also some of the challenges we had to overcome, because I'm sure you heard a no or two during the time there as well.
yeah. So, I mean, during my period, I came in during, I would say, a period of change, and during a process of when the company was in basically a scale-up process. Historically, the company had, when it first started out, the founders, I want to say, gave away more than half of wallpaper advertising. Those who are watching this and who have used WeTransfer, or those who don't, the company is a large part of its revenue is through advertising. So when it first started out, it was giving away half of its inventory to the arts, to creativity. Today, I think it's like something like 25%. So it's been it's shrunk considerably just because of the nature of business and the almighty dollar or euro trying to make money. But I think over time that aspect of giving back to the community got eaten up bit by bit. So running an internal creative group to try and champion them to do really great work for the community and also for themselves was hard to ring fence at times. We did our best to do that by allowing people to giving people 30% of their time to be able to play, as an example. But I think it's also it's also sadly a unique organization by origin as well, just because of going back to the founders and the way that the founders were in its DNA. But I think that you can create that culture. I think if you're really adamant and you want to create that kind of culture where there's a level of aspiration, being able to frame out an argument why and go to bat for it is something that I think is possible anywhere, really. So.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Betsy, it feels from the outside like Zendesk has a culture of creative expression. Would you say that's true? And how has that been kind of cultivated and maintained over the years?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely plus one what Nassim is saying about, allowing that 20 to 30% of time for the team. I will say, I will be honest that it's a challenge. We've tried different methods to make that work. I think, we're also going through, evolution as a company, which means the team also evolves, right, as well. Like when your leadership's evolving, you have to adapt to that leadership as well. And I will say that it feels right now right for us to focus on, looking for those gaps that we were talking about and staying ahead of our leadership so that, we're not always in a reactionary state, that we're looking into the future and we're baking in time to experiment with even within what the business is asking us to do. So I think right now that's where my head's at is like, how do we get ourselves as a team in a position where we are experimenting for the future and not and baking in creativity there and not necessarily trying to push it into the projects that we're working on right now for the business. And then of course, yes, constantly fighting for that 20 to 30% of time for the team to just have some open space to be able to do deep thinking, to be able to go explore and get inspired.
And you guys, how big is your team there? It's sort of relatively big for a company your size. Is that right? Does that make things a little bit easier, or am I just kind of being too presumptuous there?
I don't know if it makes
My team
I don't know if it
currently
makes it easier. Oh, sorry. I don't know who we're asking this question.
No, sorry, Betsy. No, No, go ahead.
Sorry, that one was to you, Betsy.
Okay. I think I think at Zendesk we're around 25. And I don't know if it makes it easier, right? Like the business is constantly demanding. So it feels like no matter how big or small we are, inundated with work. But we are, I will say we are consistently looking at how we structure ourselves to adjust and do the best work we can do for the business and make sure that we're not burning out.
Yes, well, that obviously is fundamental to everything, and I'm sure, yeah, that goes for many roles these days, but especially in the creative side of things. We could do a whole topic on burnout in creative leadership, especially. But maybe that's one for another time. Nessim, sorry, did you want to come in on that one?
Oh no! I misunderstood the question. So
listen, Betsy, you mentioned there about experimentation, and I love this notion of staying ahead of the curve and experimenting for the future as well. I think that's definitely a lesson that a lot of teams could take forward. But again, I know that's really tricky when you're in the weeds of the day-to-day. When we've spoken before, we've talked a little bit about channels, I suppose, and brands these days have to show up in many different ways and places and channels these days. But of the channels that Zendesk has to show up in today, are there any that you find are a little bit more ripe for that kind of experimentation? And sort of by contrast, are there any channels that you guys have to live and breathe in today that you maybe feel are less so inclined that way, that need to maybe stay a little bit more? I think you've used the word timeless before, which is a great word to use.
Yeah. I think I think you need to look for moments when you need to engage the audience and perhaps present them with new or unique information, right? So the first touch points that come to mind are definitely campaign touch points, content, social, and even strategic initiatives like conferences, right? Or big product announcements. These need to stand out from the everyday noise. And so I would say that, we tend to dial up expression for those moments to captivate the audience. Whereas in contrast, a touch point like, your company website, the corporate website, it's a complex and layered experience, right? It requires big investments that might inhibit wild creative experimentation. Of course, there's always experimentation within a website, but it has different goals, right, of performance and optimization. And so, I would say that those two things, a website needing to be, focused on lead conversions and it's midway through it could be the start or it could be midway through someone's learning journey. And so the goals are different and you want to be like really consistent, create an easy experience, and in some ways make that feel safe. Whereas the other touch points I mentioned or the other channels, you have room to be more engaging, more wild with expression. Again, dialing up and down your brand styles as needed to stand out.
Yeah, and just a quick something that sprung to mind while you were talking there. We at our flagship event last year had a really great chat with Damien Carell, who's the creative director at Figma. And one thing he talked about was this notion that the areas where you need to dial up your brand, they're the things that as creatives the team really wants to work on and get super excited about that. Whereas some of them may be less, again, for want of a better word, sexy, the less kind of attractive projects are slightly more difficult to motivate the team to kind of still do a great job on. Do you find that, you guys, or not so much? Sorry, that's the Betsy again. Sorry. Not doing well with direction today.
I'm so sorry, Dave. So sorry, but
Oh, I've got you back again. I can hear you.
okay. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I apologize. I don't.
Did you hear my
know
question?
actually what's going on with my internet, but I
I think we've lost you again, Betsy. Just while we get you back again, I do have a question on a similar subject for Tom, actually. I know I've still got you because you're about 10 feet away from me. Because it's really interesting what Betsy said there about these kind of these almost like kind of wow moments, you know, these things that where expression needs to be really dialed up, and then a lot of areas where things are still need to be expressed and expressive, but a lot more subtle. I mean, that's different for every brand, and I know it's different for every client that you guys and your team work with. So how do you, from an agency perspective and from a creative director an agency perspective, go about working with clients to find those sweet spots and those moments?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and to build on what Betsy was saying, it's around trying to strike that balance and make sure that it doesn't become very predictable, not only in the typical executions, but then also, you know, a predictable aspect of the brand coming to fruition within those aspects. So, you know, it's different for every single brand, but there's common themes that need to be communicated for a brand to be effective. So it needs, you know, to build human connection, it needs to be emotive. It obviously needs to promote a kind of a product and service. You're looking to instill some confidence and inform or drive leadership. You want to be seen as innovative and drive values and create intrigue. So there's a whole mix of messages there that you want to get across, and then there's a whole plethora of platforms and executions that you can utilize. And it's really around finding that unique moment for your brand that's authentic and instilled in the organization already, but that can then be creatively expressed. So where is that opportunity in the strategy that can join the dots with the execution and be a kind of a moment of delight for a brand that breaks a mold without breaking consistency as such, and that is quite challenging to achieve as such, and it's only really by having a very solid foundation and understanding of a brand and the organization and the appetites of where, you know, as Nassim was saying earlier, where do you take risks, where is that tipping point of this is worth the push, or, you know, we're going to go out on a bit of a limb here or do something that is unpredictable for the brand, but we, you know, there's a calculation there as to what we would expect to glean back in return as such. And it's an exciting prospect, and I think that's why naturally those moments maybe get more conversations than some of the more, as you were saying, Dave, perhaps slightly less glamorous subject matter of consistency and things like that. And I think what you've got to hope for is that the foundations of the brand have enabled consistency to come relatively intuitively. So as Betsy was saying earlier, if you can secure those attributes and create yourself a checklist to, you know, hopefully you don't need a lot of ongoing conversations around that consistency, and you can look at the more dynamic elements of the brand and how you can push those boundaries within those constraints and attributes as such. And so it's a really tough question, but yeah, and it's different for every brand, as you say, Dave, but those are the kind of the subject matters and the conversations that we look to have to try to find where are those opportunities and where can we make the difference and move the dial.
Yeah, and I mean, are there any instances where you feel like they've got quite a definitive idea of where to dial up and where to dial down, but you either personally or as a team have got to know the brand a little bit, and you think, actually, you know what, we see it slightly differently, but then again, you're not necessarily as involved in the brand, so maybe, you know, you don't feel that, not that you haven't got the authority necessarily, but there's kind of a slight disparity where you see it and where they see it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, Nassim touched on this point earlier. When you're new to an organization, or whether you are new to a conversation with an organization, you have that opportunity to almost be naive about some of the processes, the structure, what are do's and don'ts, where have people said no in the past. And I think, you know, something I'm excited about whenever we work with a new organization is is to take that opportunity to just seek permission later, really, to just go out on a limb and show something that might not feel that comfortable with our understanding of the brand initially. But I think that's typically it's what we're there to do as such, is to push the boundaries. And so I would say 9 times out of 10, we see things very differently, but there is a strength and a merit in that. And it's then about working with our points of contact and the stakeholders to find the sweet spot between our thinking and theirs, and move the brand forwards.
Yeah, for sure. There's one topic that I really want to cover off, because I think it's super important before we go into some questions. Betsy, I'm just checking. Do we have you on audio? Has your internet made a miraculous recovery?
I'm here.
Hello. Yes, we got you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, great. I can hear you.
Yeah.
Good. I'm going to just come to Nassim with a quick question, and then I might kind of ask you on this one as well, because I think it's definitely relevant to you guys as well. Yeah, Nassim, I kind of spoke about it a little bit in my intro, but again, from an agency point of view, from a client perspective point of view, we are definitely seeing more pressure than ever to justify return on investment. And what that often means is, what can we measure? How can we measure it? What are the metrics? How can we kind of track this? And obviously, a lot of creative work just doesn't necessarily fit that mold. To what extent do you feel that this increased kind of, because sometimes an increased focus on return on investment is not a bad thing. Ultimately, people need to know where their dollars are working for them and where they're not. That's not always an easy thing, but ultimately, that is valuable if you can work that out. So, but on the whole, do you feel that that kind of approach is making creative brand building, brand awareness more difficult?
Yeah, 100%. I don't have an answer to it either. Wish I did. I mean, it's a changing, like I said, it's a changing landscape. I'm still, I think I am trying to remain as naive and nimble as possible, because I feel like I'm facing a tidal wave of change in the way that marketing is happening right now. But I think it kind of goes back to how I originally started things in regards to, I think if you inherently understand the organization you're working for and where and how they value things, you can begin to understand where you can make your creative bets. So as an example, my working with Zoe, I've been with them now for about 4 months. They have hit home runs in content and making content. They have a blockbuster podcast that I've been fortunate enough to meet a variety of people who know of it, and they talk about it. And as such, they as an organization are willing to place bets on content creation. Not necessarily willing to place bets on marketing, traditional marketing, as some of us on this call might know of, or above the line advertising for that matter, because they haven't really done it historically. So they don't place a lot of value in it. Consequently, my working at Squarespace, they've spent an enormous amount of money on above the line advertising historically, running 9 Super Bowl ads over the last decade. So very, very different organizations. When it comes to content creation, Squarespace hasn't done it. So if you were to try and get Squarespace to make some content, it would probably be difficult from a creative standpoint. Whereas conversely, Zoe's different. So I would bet that it's probably the same for Betsy at Zendesk. Tom, you probably faced it with some of the organizations that you've been working with and for. I think the better you can understand the organization and where and how they value things, you can then begin to understand and carve out where those opportunities are.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. And again, as I said, Betsy, coming to you, just a short, I mean, a really simple question. What does success look like to you guys at Zendesk, and are you under more pressure to measure and track that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, again, Zendesk's been going through, Zendesk is maturing as a business. And with that comes scrutiny over data and performance of almost everything. So yeah, +1 on understanding how what the organization values, and if the organization is valuing performance, then I actually think there's wins there. Like when you know where you're being successful, right? When you have the data of what how the audience is perceiving the brand, or you know, what's actually contributing to revenue, then you have a baseline to build from, right? We at Zendesk, we recently just launched one of our biggest brand campaigns ever, and we're actually really excited about it as a creative team because we have an integrated marketing team who's focused on figuring out how that is performing in the market. And when we know how that's performing, we kind of know how it will give us information on how we can build upon it. And so for the first time ever, we're able to kind of like top down think about how do we create consistency, right? What's working at the brand awareness level, and how should that influence everything else that we're doing? Um, so yeah, I mean, +1 to what Nassim is saying, and absolutely feeling the pressure. Um, I think it really also depends on the support you have cross-functionally, and whether or not the organization is set up to even analyze whether or not we're successful.
Yeah, definitely. And that's one also to you, Tom, but a slightly different kind of slant on that question. So obviously, we work on a lot of different projects. Some of them where success and objectives and how they're going to measure those objectives are pretty clear. Others, like brand evolutions, brand refreshes, things like that, maybe a little bit less so. But have you seen a change over the last few years, especially since we've been getting more and more into this kind of B2B tech world, which is certainly in the last kind of 5, 6, 7 years? Has there been an increase in pressure from us to focus on metrics, or is it still fundamentally about the quality of the creative work for you and your team?
I think fundamentally there's still the appreciation and the value in creativity, but I think there's more measurables required on the back of it. So in the past it may have been more around awareness building, and a holistic sense that awareness is happening would have been acceptable. But now I think that it needs definition, it needs results and figures and numbers to be able to benchmark that as such. And I think also the appetites are changing, just in terms of maybe less on an awareness side and more on a demand generation, and just making sure that actually it's being seen to change business results more quickly. And so the nature of the conversations is changing. I think there's still an appetite and appreciation for creativity, but I think the goals and objectives that is setting out to achieve, the dial's moved on that ever so slightly. And it's sometimes that can be a challenging conversation, and sometimes we just need to reset in terms of what the objectives are and what's realistic from outcomes. And also it might be that we've been asked to do one deliverable, but actually maybe there's an entirely different way that we could go about achieving those objectives. And going back to our earlier conversations, it might just be that fresh perspective, or perhaps a learning from another client or a different vertical can influence the way in which we might approach that project.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, folks, the question side of things is like tumbleweed today. If anyone in the audience has got anything that jumps out at them, they would like to ask our lovely panelists today, then please do jump in. In the meantime, obviously, like any good presenter, I've come prepared. And actually, I did pull a couple of questions from those form fills. Again, I've mentioned a few times that we asked people who registered to tell us what their biggest challenges are. I hope my friend Alan Roll from the creative team at Airtable was in the audience today. I'm not sure if you joined live. I know you signed up, and when you signed up, you mentioned that one of your team's challenges is getting these efforts, and by these efforts, I presume you mean the evolution and the creation of brand expression across all touch points, prioritized over other tasks. This is probably one for Nassim and Betsy, but I mean, how do you kind of prioritize? I suppose prioritize. I mean, Betsy mentioned it before, and Tom spoke about this as well. Kind of like the big moments, the more subtle evolution. I suppose this really comes down to how you manage your team effectively to do their best work all the time. especially when that team may not be the biggest. I don't know which one of you wants to come in on that, if either of you want to jump into that.
I think my internet may have paused. I'm gonna hand this one over to Betsy, and hopefully sorry.
Okay, is the question about prioritization?
Yeah,
Like
so
how are we prioritizing?
Yeah, how do you prioritize effectively? And again, I know you guys have got a 25 strong team. I don't think Alan's team is quite that big at our table. So I think it's just really about, you really have you've got big dreams for the brand, but a small team and not that much resource. And I know that you guys work on a lot of stuff at Zendesk, so the prioritization thing probably still comes into play. But really, I know there'll be quite a lot of creative leaders in the audience, actually. I know a lot of you guys signed up, so I'm sure they'll really want to know how you guys focus on how you prioritize to get great work done all the time, both big and small projects.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is changing all the time with our team, or it has been for the last couple of years. Like we're moving from a team that has done everything in-house to a team that's, wants to work more with outside parties and agencies to supplement, allowing us to still like create or serve the rest of the business, but enabling the in-house team the time to focus on those big moments like I talked about. So right now we're moving towards a structure where our team isn't doing everything for the business anymore. That we're setting up our systems so that we can enable agencies and outside people to support the organization while we focus on those big strategic initiatives, like I mentioned, or, big moments for the company. And so that's also beneficial to our team because we are not spread thin, right? We're not trying to do a lot of things in silos. The goal is that we're doing less with more integrity and we can collaborate better together. So, I think our prioritization model has changed a lot over the last couple of years, and that's currently where we are.
So let me just get this straight. What you're saying, Betsy, is everyone should go out there and hire agencies because that's the best way to prioritize, right? Perfect. Great stuff. Everybody take note of that, please. I'll just give you a moment all to write that down while I just
I mean, I think it's a good point. Where is the value for the business, right? Where is your time best spent to make moves for the business? And that's currently how we're prioritizing. When, in addition to that, it's, like those big moments are often heavy collaboration moments cross-functionally. They require a lot of internal collaboration and alignment. They require a lot of leadership involvement. And so those are best spent time for our team. We know the business deeply. We have relationships with our stakeholders. We can move fast. And again, pour all of our creative energy into something that's really meaningful for the business.
Sorry, guys. I'm being reliably informed that we do have some questions. I just can't see them. So I'm just going to ask my contact, Alex, to share them on Slack with me. I'm reliably informed there's a question from Tamara. I can't see that. So just give me 1 second. Oh, yes, here we go. So, and again, this goes out to any of you guys who'd like to jump in on this. How do you approach the challenge of working with leadership who likes, in inverted commas, design, but doesn't necessarily understand design? How do you sell the value to them? And this is something actually that quite a few people mentioned in those forms, so selling in the value of creativity, particularly to leadership. And Nessim, I know we touched on the fact that actually quite a lot of the leadership at businesses you've been at before, value what you've done from a creative standpoint. But there's a big difference between doing that and actually understanding it. And obviously sometimes that makes it harder to sell in. So yeah, anybody would like to jump in on that one, feel free.
Tom, Betsy, do you want to take this one?
I'm happy to comment on this, actually. Let me take a turn. I think, particularly from our role and being invited into organizations, we can sometimes help with this because it might be that we've got a use case or we've got a precedent from a different vertical, a different client, whereby we can show an example of how that design, that creativity has made a difference and shifted the dial. And sometimes that's not hard metrics. Sometimes it's effectiveness of a brand or the reach of the brand, or is ultimately enabled them to move to the next juncture of kind of a business evolution, etc. But I think in our capacity as an agency, we have a responsibility there to kind of prove our worth and to show the value that the work can bring, either through the partnership or from the in-house resource. So from our perspective, I think, use cases, as much results as you can do, and also just trying to instill trust that if they like design, they can obviously have an appreciation for it, and I think they just need to place trust in you and your capacity to see that through and deliver the results that they're striving for as such.
Yeah, and I know,
Yeah.
Sorry, Betsy, carry on. Go ahead.
Can I just add on to that? Because I think what I would add is from an internal perspective, knowing what your leadership cares about and being able to speak their language. For example, going back to what we were talking about earlier, right? Which is if they care about performance, if they care about the metrics, being able to position how the work you're doing is going to influence those can take you a long way, can build credibility and build that trust that Tom was talking about.
And how, again, does that come down, like Tom was saying, does it always come down to hard metrics? Or are there other things at play as well?
No, I mean, I wouldn't say, I can't say for certain if it's always metrics, right? It really depends on leadership and what they care about. And that, that could be that they care about being the biggest voice in the industry. They care about thought leadership, right? So it's how is the brand, or how is the experience, how is the effort that we're putting into the creative contributing to that?
Well, actually, Tom, I mean, that speaks to one of our clients, Rubric, who were IP, it's kind of common knowledge that they were going to go public within a certain time frame, and their leadership were really focused around building share of voice within cybersecurity. They've been a data management and backup company, and then they effectively said, right, we want to now be seen as a cybersecurity company. We are data security, but they didn't have that much kind of share of voice in that space, and that was all through thought leadership. And actually, but then again, Tommy, you can kind of embellish on this a little bit more. They had a leadership that was, again, very, very happy to let the creative team in particular run that and do what they needed to do, and it works great effect, right?
Absolutely. And coming back to Nassim's point, it comes from the very top at Rubric. Bipple has such a great appreciation of creativity and design, and so he respects those teams and he respects the value that they bring to the business and kind of empowers them to do their body of work. And that makes it that much easier because you don't have this sell up. To tomorrow's question, you don't have to do the sell up as such. You just need to ensure that the body of work that you're proposing and the way in which you're reflecting the brand is in keeping with their vision. And as Betsy was saying, they'll have their own objectives and priorities that they want to fulfill. And for Rubric, yeah, as you were saying, Dave, in particular, they wanted that kind of thought leadership space to be represented. They recruited an internal team to lead that up, and we've been very fortunate in being an agency partner to them. And we've now done 4 editions of Rubric Zero Labs to kind of help them win that space as such and to be represented. And I think, coming back full circle to tomorrow's point, Nassim made a really good point earlier on, just in terms of appetites and in where to invest money and things like that. And so I think that there might be an opportunity in that to answer that question as well, in that if there is appetite to do content, for example, is there a way in which you could reimagine that content and take it to the next level? So, perhaps rather than trying to sell something that they're less familiar with or is out of their comfort zone, is there a way in which you can shift the dial within existing infrastructure or approaches or the way in which the brand communicates that is a stepping stone perhaps to then having conversations about some wildcard or those wow moments that might come, because to sell us a Super Bowl ad to someone that's comfortable doing content might be too much of a stretch. So it's perhaps choosing those battles and taking incremental steps to taking leadership with you on that journey.
What a way to end. That's a great shout, Tom. Really, really appreciate that. And listen, Betsy, Tom, Nassim, thank you so much for your time today. That was great. Really, really enjoyed that. Hope you guys did too. We'll be doing lots more webinars in the future, so do stay tuned. Follow us on LinkedIn, Shape by, for more of that. But all that remains for me to say is, Nassim, have a lovely holiday. Betsy, Tom, enjoy the rest of your days, and we will see you very soon.